I know that the outgoing governor was under a lot of pressure. There was a lot of talk that her father was interfering somewhat with the monetary policy decision-making, and it appeared as though President Erdogan had her back. That all changed over the weekend. She obviously decided to step down. Let me ask you, how big of a deal is this going to be, and what is the market feeling about the deputy taking on the role now?
Sure. Look, Fatih Karahan is a credible name that the market rates. He's a central banker through and through, and therefore I would anticipate that the monetary policy trajectory of Turkey going through back to the orthodox monetary policies that we have seen being implemented for the past year or so will continue. However, I think there's a bigger issue behind this in that Turkey not just does it need to continue implementing orthodox monetary policies, but the central bank governor's longevity of tenure has to be a little longer. We went through 5 different central bank governors in 5 years.
Right.
So the country needs a long kind of tenure central bank governor to implement all the policies that the markets and investors are looking forward to.
Ultimately, this is a question of the central bank's credibility, right? And this is what it all boils down to. And before the elections, what we saw was President Erdogan was applying political pressure on the central bank. Not good for accountability. That changed once the elections took place. Obviously, the outgoing central bank governor came in, and she raised interest rates from 8.5% to 45%. In the past, President Erdogan wouldn't have allowed that to happen, but he did let her get away with it. Inflation, what did seem like it was going on the right track, but of course these numbers suggest otherwise now. Foreign exchange reserves have started being built up again. So things seemed like they were going on the right path. What does this episode do to the central bank's credibility now?
I think it's a tricky one to navigate. The central bank now needs to continue on its path to potentially more orthodox monetary policy measures. I don't think that will change, by the way, but we have a local election, quite a heated local elections coming up in the country. So together with Minister Şimşek, the message to investors have always been, look, predictability is very important. We are going to get back onto a more conventional track. This doesn't really help matters. So what we really need more than anything else from an investor's perspective to see is whether elections or post-elections will Fatih Karahan have tenure enough to be able to circumnavigate whatever challenges that get thrown in Turkey, but also from a geopolitical perspective, how to navigate the country. Well,
you bring me on to my next point. Geopolitically, I thought it's interesting that Russian President Putin is scheduled to visit Turkey next week. That came as a bit of a surprise to me. I mean, Turkey at the end of the day is a NATO country. I know that in the past, President Erdogan has liked to see himself as a power broker within the region, sort of a diplomatic go-between between Russia and Ukraine. But what does it tell you about President Erdogan, the fact that he's hosting the West's enemy #1 right now?
I think President Erdogan is one of the few people when it comes to this matter that can credibly play the intermediary between the West and Putin. But I think the more interesting or more relevant subject matter here is how Putin is really playing for time to weigh through the end of the US elections. The country has gone on to war footing. The NATO allies have not been able to provide the ammunition that Ukraine needs. There's a big debate going on about whether frozen Russian assets can be used to be able to finance Kiev's war efforts. And at the same time, US Congress is holding $60 billion of aid to Ukraine, and because of Orban, EU is holding roughly 50 billion euros. So the meeting on its own, I don't think is a negative signal. Whether the meeting will yield any tangible results is debatable, because I do think that until or unless the President of the United States changes, potentially Trump coming in, Putin will not really make any concessions that would be needed to alleviate the war as it is right now.
Many people say that it's a waiting game for Putin. And of course, that's one war that's going on right now. But then we have another war in Israel-Gaza. And I just wonder your take on the strikes that we saw out of the U.S. this weekend on military infrastructure from Shia militant groups throughout Iraq and Syria. What is your response to that, and how significant of an escalation does it pose, do you think?
Even though the U.S. claims that it is not interested in escalating this war, we are in very thin ground because we live in the age of proxy wars anyway. Now, what the Houthis, what the Iranian-backed Houthis have done to global shipping and trade is quite significant. And it will likely be more significant if this continues. So to an extent, I understand the US reaction, obviously a reaction to US soldiers being killed. However, they need to operate with a surgical precision rather than a much more of a broader conflict, because it will not take too much to get the region into a wider war. Now, Saudi Arabia and UAE are in particular and very kind of nervous footing, if you will, because they do want cautious footing, because they do want this conflict to go away. They do want a more constructive relationship in the region. Saudi Arabia very much needs that to happen in order to achieve their Vision 2030 targets. It's just that the direction that we are heading on right now is very, very dangerous. It only takes one national actor to by accident hit another one in this conflict for things to escalate. And US's moves right now, although seem to be contained, have the potential to escalate into a much more dangerous.
You know, we only have a minute left, but let me just ask you this: do you think that in response to these U.S. attacks of the weekend, that the Houthis will actually slow down or temper down the pace of attacks on commercial vessels? Will this disincentivizing from responding further in the absence of Israel-Gaza coming down?
I mean, the whole idea of playing this asymmetric war through proxies is that the actual targets are very difficult to hit. So although the US says that they have hit critical infrastructure of the Houthis to be able to stop them from doing this, only time will tell. The real question is, you know, does Iran really want war? I don't think so. Will Houthis stop these attacks? I hope so, because the global shipping and trade and the global trade as a result, dynamics will suffer if this doesn't stop.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, and one that we're watching very closely from an economic perspective as well. Always a pleasure to chat to you. I really enjoy our conversations. Ozan Ozkural, the CEO of Tanto Capital Partners. Well, we're going to round up the show taking a quick look at how markets are faring. It is a mixed bag for European equities, but we are